Hi there! I'm Mike McArthur from the Oshkosh Public Library, and welcome to some more Librarian Learns. This is the series where I take a look at a bit of Oshkosh history that I've wondered about myself or someone has asked me about while I've been working at the library. As always, if you have comments, corrections, or suggestions for future topics, let me know in the links in the description or just in the comments of wherever you are viewing this. So today, I'm going to be taking a look at the Chief Oshkosh Monument. The Chief Oshkosh Monument, if you had never seen it, sits in Menominee Park. It was donated by Colonel John Hicks in 1911. Hicks was the publisher of the Northwestern, library benefactor, big proponent of public art. He donated the Civil War Monument in Opera House Square, the lions in the library, and numerous other statues and busts all over the city. The Chief Oshkosh Monument, like many other monuments Hicks donated, was crafted by Gaetano Trentanove of Florence, Italy. The monument was unveiled June 21st, 1911. It was a big to-do. The only thing missing was an actual descendant of Chief Oshkosh's. Hicks had been in conversation with some of Chief Oshkosh's descendants, though according to the news coverage at the time, that correspondence was unproductive. So Hicks's grandson, John Hicks III, unveiled the statue, which probably was adorable. The plaque accompanying the statue, which rests below the statue to this day, reads as follows: Oshkosh, a chief of the Menominee tribe of Indians whose greatest achievement in this life was in giving to the city the name which will make it famous, while one stone remains upon another. So numerous people in the city have pointed out that this monument is in desperate need of updating and some historical context. Why, might you ask? Let's get into it. So pretty much everything about the Chief Oshkosh Monument is a fiction. It's myth. So first off, to say that his giving his name to the city was Oshkosh's greatest achievement is kind of insulting. Oshkosh was a warrior, a statesman. He led the Menominee people during probably their most difficult time as the federal and state governments were removing them from their ancestral lands, placing them onto reservations to make way for the white European settlers who were moving west. If you had to pick Oshkosh's greatest achievement, you could probably go with when he was part of the delegation that traveled to Washington, D.C. to petition President Fillmore to have the Menominee resettle in Wisconsin rather than being moved, as planned, to Minnesota, thus securing the land that would eventually become the Menominee Reservation. Then there's the fact that it says it gave his name. Well, I would say he didn't really give anything. The name Oshkosh was selected at a meeting by all European settlers in 1839. They almost named the entire area Athens, which was far more popular than Oshkosh was at the time. But this selection was as much political and economic as it was honorific, as the Menominee people who were displaced to around Lake Poygan at the time still greatly outnumbered the white settlers and were the settlers' most important trading partners. It behooved them to not tick off your neighbors, essentially. So then there's the fact that the statue looks nothing like him. This is what Chief Oshkosh actually looked like. This is the only known portrait of him, taken in about 1854 when he was in his kind of mid-60s. The men who created the Chief Oshkosh Monument knew what he looked like. They just had no interest in portraying him as he was. What they were looking for was, and I quote, the idealization of the American Indian. Trentanove is quoted as saying that I wanted to make a statue of Chief Oshkosh when he was a real Indian chief. So what did Trentanove mean by a real Indian chief? Well, he was very clear about what his idea of a real Indian actually was. My idea is to represent the real typical Indian of North America, with feathers, deerskin, and moccasins, and not with modern clothes. Again, they're very explicit about what they want. They're not really interested in Oshkosh the man or even a Menominee Indian. It's about the typical North American Indian. This is the one that's been kind of seared into my brain through popular culture my entire life. It has its roots in the 19th century writings of men like James Fillmore Cooper, who authored Last of the Mohicans. It was later reinforced by the portraits of Edward Sheriff Curtis, who famously staged most of his photographs. Finally, this imagery was set in stone by hundreds of Western movies produced by Hollywood in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and through the 60s. Whether it's Gaetano Trentanove, Edward Curtis, or John Ford, these portrayals always stereotype Native peoples as anachronistic and essentially a dead people. The Northwestern at the time noted that the statue was a memorial to a race that had virtually ceased to exist. It was a memorial to the departed. It was a binding memento of one of the most romantic and inspiring characteristic epochs of American history. First of all, it firmly places the Native history just as a moment in American history, which is kind of insulting since they were here for, thousands of years before any white man showed up. However, it is also ironic in that quote appears right next to this headline on the very same page. It's almost like there are two different Indians here. The noble Indian of the past that has tragically ceased to exist, and these pesky Indians of the present who keep fighting assimilation policies of the federal government. So you might ask, really, what's the big deal about being idealized? Wouldn't we all want to have those abs, right? Well, Trentanove in 1911, I think inadvertently summed up exactly why this type of imagery proves to be problematic. The few people still living who may have a slight recollection of Chief Oshkosh in his old age have seen him dressed in a blanket and wearing a plug hat. But let us consider that these few will pass away, and yet the statue will remain for centuries. Anyone who actually knew Oshkosh as the man, dead and gone. The statue and the mythology that it sells will last for centuries. By always portraying this as idealized, romanticized race that is long dead in the past, you're able to ignore the very real people who are still alive today because they're not the real Indian. Oh gosh, I wish I was doing this on a warmer day. Okay. All right, so here I am, actually in front of the monument, in case you didn't know exactly where it was. It's right here in Menominee Park. So in 2015, the Landmarks Commission Committee started work on updating the monument. So, it said actually something factual about Chief Oshkosh or the Menominee people. Unlike their counterparts in 1911, they actually contacted and brought on board members of the Menominee Nation to help tell their own history. What a novel idea. They also brought in experts from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh who specialize in indigenous peoples, cultures, and histories. By all accounts, it was a very slow process, and the pandemic that started in 2020 did not help matters. Overall, the project was met with a great amount of enthusiasm and positivity, though it did become heated at certain points. On November 9th, 2021, the Oshkosh City Council voted unanimously to approve 5 plaques that would enhance this monument. The plaques, which will surround the monument as you see today, will address Chief Oshkosh's biography, his history as a statesman, and the stewardship of land by the Menominee people. It's the 5th plaque that really turned out to be the most controversial one, in that it directly addresses, the white stereotypes of Native peoples, as well as a legacy of settler colonialism, which the monument, as it stands now, kind of represents. Hey, progress. Awesome. Oh yeah, and there's the whole issue of, again, that Chief Oshkosh allegedly interned here when it's almost certain that it's not actually him. But that's kind of like a whole nother thing. Go read Scott Cross's book on Chief Oshkosh to get all the details on that. I'll link. So hey, I definitely learned some stuff. If you want to learn more about this topic from people smarter than I, you can check out some of the resources that I used to make this video. I've listed them in the description, along with all of the Northwestern's news coverage of the monument from 1911. And with that, I'll see you later.